Peaceful life under British India. New land revenue settlement introduced by the British in India. After the Battle of Buxar, the British got the Diwani rights over Bengal, Bihar and Orissa. That is, the right to collect the land revenue. Now, the East India Company had to organize the land revenue system in such a way that it yielded enough income to meet the growing administrative expenses of the company and support its trade in India. The British introduced 3 land revenue settlements in India: Zamindari system or permanent settlement in Bengal, Bihar and Orissa, Ryotwari settlement in large parts of southern and western India, and Mahalwari settlement in Punjab, northwest provinces and Awadh. All these land revenue arrangements had a major impact on the life of the peasantry and even on zamindars living in the Indian villages. Zamindari system or permanent settlement. This revenue settlement was introduced by the Governor General Lord Cornwallis for Bengal 1793. Features of permanent settlement. The zamindars of Bengal, Bihar and Orissa were made hereditary owners of the entire land in their zamindari. In return, they had to collect rent from the peasants and pay a fixed amount of revenue to the company. The amount to be paid was fixed as it was not to be increased in future. As long as the zamindar paid the land revenue, he had hereditary rights over his zamindari or landholding. Impact of permanent settlement. Number 1. This helped the British to do financial planning. This revenue arrangement ensured that the company got a fixed amount on a regular basis. Number 2. It was also expected that the zamindars would show interest in improving cultivation as they were made permanent and hereditary landowners. Number 3. Since the revenue demand of the state would not be increased, the zamindars would get the benefit of the increased production from land. Number 4. But in reality, the zamindars faced a serious problem. The British had fixed the land revenue at a very high rate, and many zamindars could not pay that amount. But non-payment of land revenue meant that the British could take over the zamindari and auction it off. Many zamindars lost their zamindari. Number 5. Later, from the 19th century onwards, when the prices of grains were raised and cultivation expanded, zamindars enjoyed heavy jump in their income. But the British did not get any advantage as they received only a fixed amount as land revenue. Number 6. Most of the zamindars were not interested in improving the land. Many of them shifted to cities, renting out the land to the tenants. They were only interested in their income from this rent. Such zamindars who lived in the cities and came to the villages only for the collection of rent were called absentee landlords. Number 7. Unfortunately, the farmers, who were the actual cultivators, were exploited very badly. They had to pay a high rent to the zamindars and could be thrown out of their land anytime. Often, to pay the rent, they had to take loans from the moneylenders who exploited them in many ways and sometimes even managed to take over their land. Ryotwari settlement. This land revenue settlement was introduced by Thomas Munro in Madras, Berar, Bombay and Assam in 1820. Features of Ryotwari settlement. A. The peasants were recognized as the owners of the land. B. There were no middlemen between the government and the peasants. C. The land was not taken away from the peasants as long as they paid the revenue. D. The revenue was fixed for a period of 20 to 40 years. E. The peasant was individually responsible for direct payment of the land revenue to the government. Impact of Ryotwari settlement. Number 1. Even though the Ryots had to pay land revenue directly to the British, they were exploited. Number 2. The British fixed the land revenue at a high rate, and the Ryots were often forced to take loans from the money lenders who cheated them and often took away their land. Number 3. Unable to pay the land revenue, many peasants fled to the countryside and villages became deserted in many regions. The British expected that the new system would transform the peasants into enterprising farmers, but this did not happen. Mehelwari settlement. 1822. The Mehelwari settlement was introduced by a British officer, Holt Mackenzie, in Punjab, Northwest Provinces and Awadh. Features of Mehelwari settlement. A. In this system, a settlement was made with a group of villages collectively called Mehel. B. The estimated revenue of each plot of land within the village was added up to calculate the revenue that each village or Mehel had to pay. C. This demand was revised periodically. D. The responsibility of collecting the land revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headman. Thus, through this system, the British tried to preserve the villages as an important social institution of North India. E. The middlemen between the government and the villagers were eliminated. Impact of Mehelwari settlement. Number 1. In this arrangement also, the big and powerful zamindars dominated and exploited the smaller and the poor peasants. Number 2. Many small farmers were deprived of ownership of their land by the rich landlords or money lenders of the villages. Number 3.
Thus, in this system too, there was a concentration of land and authority in the hands of a few rich landlords.
Commercialization of agriculture. The British also started growing crops that were required in Europe. The British persuaded or pressurized the Indian farmers to produce cash crops like indigo, cotton, raw silk, opium, pepper, tea and sugar. Production of the cash crops enabled the British to make a lot of profit. The brutal and exploitative face of British imperialism can be explained better by the incident when the Chinese tried to stop the illegal opium trade by the British and the British declared a war against them. These wars were called the Opium Wars. Cultivation of opium. The British bought tea from China and had to pay for it in silver because the Chinese were self-sufficient and did not want Western goods. But
soon they came up with a very cunning and corrupt plan of producing opium in India and then smuggling it into China.
Cultivation of indigo. The Indian indigo was in great demand by European cloth manufacturers because it produced a rich blue color. During the last decades of the 18th century, indigo cultivation in Bengal expanded rapidly and soon came to dominate the world market. The European planters began to invest in indigo production. They pressurized the farmers to sign contracts and produce indigo. The farmers who signed contracts got loans, which made it compulsory for them to cultivate indigo on at least 25% of their land holdings. But in reality, these peasants were brutally exploited. They got a very low price for the indigo and the cycle of loans never ended. Moreover, the farmers were forced by the planters otherwise to produce indigo on their most fertile land in which the peasants otherwise preferred to cultivate rice. But indigo production ruined the fertility of the soil. Impact of commercialization of agriculture. Commercialization of Indian agriculture benefited British industries and British traders. But these benefits did not reach the Indian farmers. They were brutally exploited. The British agrarian policy also increased the percentage of landless labourers. In case they failed to pay the rent to the zamindars or land revenue to the government, they had to lose their land and were forced to work as landless labourers. Moreover, in the absence of any savings, the peasants were forced to take loans from the moneylenders who exploited them even more. Exploitation by the moneylenders. As the peasants were overburdened with a high land revenue, they were forced to borrow money at a high rate of interest from the moneylenders who cheated them in various ways. They charged high rates of interest, and through shrewd tactics such as false accounting, forged signature, and making the peasants sign for larger amounts than they had borrowed. As a result, the peasants were overburdened with debt, and many of them even had to lose their land. Famines. The terrible poverty, misery, and exploitation of rural India was revealed when famines ravaged the countryside regularly. Often natural causes like drought, flood, crop diseases, etc. paved the way for the problems. But heavy taxation, exploitative land revenue policies, brutal treatment by the landlords and moneylenders intensified them. In 1876 to 1878, 8 lakh people lost their lives in Madras, Hyderabad, Maharashtra, Western UP and Punjab. In the famine of 1896 to 1897, nearly 45 lakhs died. 3 million people died in the Bengal famine of 1943. These famines and the high losses of life indicate the extent of poverty and starvation which had taken root in India. Moplars Revolt and other peasant revolts. Exploitative land revenue systems, the oppression of the zamindars, and the atrocities of the moneylenders led to a series of revolts by the peasants. The peasants of Kerala, called the Moplars, revolted in the 1860s and 1870s due to the increasing burden of taxation. This was a rebellion against the rich landlords. In the middle of August 1921, agrarian riots were started by the Muslim peasants called Moplars against the zamindars. The revolt took a violent turn. The Deccan riots of the 19th century also occurred because of the heavy deaths faced by the peasants. In the Deccan region, the peasants revolted in the region of Pune, attacking the moneylenders and zamindars. The peasant burnt the account books, looted grain shops, and in some cases set fire to the house of the moneylenders. Indigo Rebellion and Indigo Commission. In 1859, ryots of Bengal refused to grow indigo. The European planters forced the peasants to plant indigo instead of food crops. But the farmer had to sell their indigo at a very low price as they were completely unprotected from the brutal indigo planters. The ryots refused to pay rent to the planters and attacked indigo factories. The indigo farmers mustered courage to revolt because they felt they had support of local zamindars and village headmen as they too faced exploitation from the local planters. The Bengal ryots had the courage to attack indigo factories with swords, spears, bows and arrows. Even the women joined them. Finally, the government was compelled to set up an Indigo Commission. The commission found the planters guilty and declared that indigo production was not profitable for the ryot. The commission decided that the ryots had to fulfill their existing contracts but allowed them to stop producing indigo in future. When the indigo production ended in Bengal, after the revolt, the planters shifted to Bihar. The indigo farmers of Champaran in Bihar started protesting against forced indigo production. When Mahatma Gandhi returned to India from South Africa, he launched his first Satyagraha campaign in Champaran against exploitation of the indigo planters. Gradually, by the 20th century, the peasants' lots improved as their movements got support from political parties and became a significant part of the Indian national movement.